The emergency session convened under blackout protocol, which, in Federation procedure, meant three things had already failed: diplomacy, market arbitration, and the shared fiction that commerce could remain neutral while people starved. In the concentric chamber above Vera Station, delegations arrived with legal teams, military aids, and the ceremonial restraint expected of powers that feared looking frightened. The Krelix Merchant League arrived with ledgers. Not briefcases, not data slates, but physical alloy codices carried by 6 armored clerks who set them on the negotiation dais like reliquaries. The message landed before any translation software did. They had not come to discuss terms. They had come to inventory assets. Ambassador Elena Kowalski watched from the human bench as the lead Krelix broker, segment master Truin, activated a projection of human trade corridors in cold amber light. Shipping lanes from Sol to the outer rehabilitation colonies lit up in neatly indexed bands, then shifted color from neutral blue to extraction red. No claim filed, no vote recorded, no hearing granted. Just reassignment. Truin's compound eyes narrowed with something between amusement and pity as he spoke in measured Federation standard, each syllable clipped with the precision of an audit finding. Humanity, he said, remained a transitional labor pool miscategorized as sovereign. Human frontier lanes would be placed under Krelix optimization charter for 10 cycles. Civilizing oversight fees would be collected in cargo priority, bonded fuel rights, and adjudicated labor quotas. It was benevolence, he added, to regulate an immature species before inefficiency ruined it. Across the chamber, minor delegations stiffened. The Velari observers folded their 4-jointed hands beneath their robes and looked down, which, in their custom, meant shame, witnessed and remembered. The scholars of Lum began recording every spoken word into public archive channels, a quiet sign they expected future trials. The Krelix ignored them all. Their confidence had arithmetic behind it. For 3 generations, they had conquered not by orbital fire, but by debt sequence and scarcity timing, driving rivals into insolvency until warships became collateral and surrender became fiscal hygiene. 87 conflicts ended that way, each one cataloged in impeccable profit language. They had learned that hunger could be made to accrue interest. Then High Commander Jack entered by tactical feed, his armored crest framed by the rotating insignia of the League's exchange fleet. Even through compressed signal, his voice carried the polished contempt of an executive who believed cruelty became moral when itemized. He addressed the chamber, but his eyes stayed on the human delegation. You measure yourselves by valor and memory, by individual dignity and private grief. Admirable myths for children. Economies are corrected by pressure, not sentiment. Species too young to optimize suffering require management. We will provide it. Human biology is short-lived, hormonally volatile, and structurally inefficient for interstellar governance. You are durable labor, not strategic peers. Accept charter status now and your losses will be minimized. Resist, and we will educate your markets until compliance becomes instinct. Elena did not answer immediately. She had spent 11 years in Federation arbitration halls and knew when silence served as a mirror. Let the words settle. Let neutral powers decide whether they had just witnessed policy or predation. Beside her, Defense Attaché Commander David Mitchell kept his hands flat on the table and his breathing slow. He had seen footage of League compliance raids on contract worlds, where clinics closed before barracks did, and food convoys were redirected to debt auctions, while civilians calculated survival in days. He knew precisely what education meant in Krelix doctrine. His expression did not move. Truin resumed as though reading weather data. Effective this cycle, the League had frozen human food futures on 8 exchange hubs due to elevated risk behavior. Bonded cargo linked to human insurers had been seized pending maturity review. Privateer auxiliaries operating under Krellick's letters of security would inspect frontier convoys for charter violations. Then came the formal declaration, stamped in 7 legal scripts and projected to all channels. The endurance test. 10 cycles of economic strangulation, convoy interdiction, and continuous compliance audits calibrated to produce non-lethal but compounding social exhaustion. A war designed to leave no battlefield for outrage, only ledgers full of preventable funerals. The human bench remained still. That stillness unsettled half the chamber more than any shouted protest could have. Elena opened her folder, turned one page, and glanced toward Rear Admiral Marcus Hayes on the secure side channel window. Hayes was not in the chamber. He stood on the bridge of the fleet command ship Resolute Dawn, 6 jumps away, with a tactical map already shifting from peacetime geometry to contingency layers. His face, weathered and blunt, gave little away except attention, sharpened to a blade. He listened to the Krellick's declaration without interrupting, then said to his operations chief, "Log it as hostile doctrine. Then ask logistics how many ways we can make their math obsolete by breakfast." On Luna, Intelligence Director Sarah Brooks watched the live feed in Strategic Assessment Room 3, while analysts built forecast trees in real time. She had spent 6 months modeling Krellick's coercion pathways after a pattern of commercial audits near human aid routes. Most projections had ended in localized losses and prolonged arbitration. None had forecast this level of open contempt in council record. She tagged the endurance test language for immediate legal exploitation, then forwarded a sealed packet to embassy security. Reserve manufacturing cells, mutual ration protocols, dormant debt nullification suits prepared for coordinated filing across 17 jurisdictions. Humanity had not wanted this confrontation. They had prepared anyway, because wanting had never been a plan. By the second day of the emergency session, neutral markets had begun to wobble as rumor outran confirmation. Insurers raised premiums on any vessel carrying medical cargo to human frontier sectors. 2 monastery convoys from the Seekers of Aum reported phantom inspections by unidentified privateers transmitting Krellick's broker codes. On Mars orbital, civilian unions voted to release reserve food stocks without waiting for price stabilization, and asteroid cooperatives opened machine shops to retrofit freighters with modular armor shells usually reserved for debris storms. The pattern emerged quickly and without central ceremony. When one node was pressured, 10 others shifted load. Humans did not call it mobilization. They called it helping out. Elena met her core team in a narrow consultation room overlooking the council's inner ring. No flags, no cameras, no theater, only names and responsibilities. David Mitchell handled military deconfliction with Federation observers who still hoped this could remain procedural. Legal advisor Anna Novak coordinated with Brooks to synchronize contract challenges, seizure injunctions, and evidence preservation for future war crimes panels if the League crossed into deprivation targeting. Civil liaison. Ingrid Larson maintained direct channels with colony administrations to prevent panic buying and keep mutual aid distribution transparent. Hayes joined as a secure hollow, his shoulders still framed by bridge lighting and tactical rain. "They believe endurance is private," he said. "They keep modeling us as isolated markets with separate thresholds. That mistake is doing half our work already." Elena listened, then assigned language with forensic care. Any public response must be calm enough to reassure allies, precise enough for courts, and sharp enough to remove ambiguity. Coercion against civilians would be named as warfare. Seized convoys would be listed by registry and timestamp, each with documented medical manifests. A deadline would be attached because warnings without clocks were invitations to stall. She understood the risk of sounding severe in a chamber that preferred euphemism. Yet she also understood the cost of soft verbs when clinics were being counted as leverage points. Behind her measured tone lived an older human memory, one that linked grain embargoes, blockades, and preventable graves across centuries of different flags. When the consultation ended, Hayes held back on the channel for one private minute. "If they escalate to embargo medicine, we answer in layers, not fury," he said. "Corridors stay open. Civilians stay protected, theirs included. If we cross that line, we become their argument." Elena nodded once. The exchange was brief, almost austere, but it captured the discipline that had made both of them effective. Neither mistook restraint for passivity. Neither mistook anger for strategy. In the outer room, a junior aide asked whether the Krelliks really expected humans to accept charter status without resistance. Mitchell answered with dry precision. "They confuse patience with surrender. It is a common accounting error." The chamber lights dimmed to session mode as delegates returned to their stations. Truan's clerks arranged the alloy ledgers in a perfect row, each volume open to a different category of projected human compliance. High Commander Jack reappeared on the central feed, confident enough to look bored. Around him, League officers moved in synchronized efficiency, already preparing convoy seizure schedules that treated names as freight types. Elena stepped to the speaking marker, hands empty, posture unadorned. The translation halo settled around her like a thin ring of frost. Every public channel went live. In that suspended quiet, with markets trembling and privateers launching, the Federation waited to hear whether humanity would plead, bargain, or endure. Elena did not raise her voice when she began. In the council acoustics, that mattered more than volume. "For 2 centuries," she said, "humanity accepted insult, procedural delay, and selective enforcement because peace was worth the cost of pride. We hoped the Federation's commercial law could mature faster than predation. We hoped the Krelliks Merchant League would choose legitimacy over intimidation. You chose coercion against civilians. Under human doctrine, that is warfare." The translation halo carried her words into 7 legal dialects, then pinned the transcript to public record. She continued with the cadence of a court order. 72 hours from this timestamp. Release every seized human convoy listed in docket series Vera 9 through Vera 19. Nullify all predatory charters imposed under extraction oversight claims. Withdraw all Krelliks privateers and proxy auxiliaries beyond Federation demarcation lines Alpha through Kappa. Confirm compliance on open channels and in verifiable telemetry. If you fail, humanity will act to restore free civilian transit and medical access by force. There will be no second warning. Truan made a small clicking sound, a Krelliks gesture that blended mockery with professional curiosity. High Commander Jack did not bother with either. He laughed long enough that several neutral delegates turned their chairs away from the central feed out of formal embarrassment. When he spoke again, each sentence landed like stamped metal. "Your species mistakes stubbornness for strategy. You are durable livestock with delusions of sovereignty. We have endured your sentimental theater because your labor had market value. That tolerance is concluded." Effective immediately, the endurance test expands to include medical embargo review. No pharmaceutical transfers to charter-violating colonies without league certification. No surgical substrate shipments through contested corridors. No emergency exemptions. David Mitchell's jaw tightened once, then settled. Anna Novak was already tagging the phrase "no emergency exemptions" for atrocity threshold analysis. Ingrid Larson sent 3 silent priority pings to colony health networks before Jack had finished speaking. The chamber did not erupt. It chilled. The avians of Kith exchanged rapid feather signals of alarm. The merchants of Pax, who rarely interrupted anything, requested procedural recess and were denied by Truan without looking at them. Elena waded through the denial, then delivered her final sentence to Jack directly. Your order has been entered into immutable record. If a patient dies because your auditors preferred leverage to mercy, that death is now evidence. Jack leaned closer to his tactical camera, crest lights reflecting in his eyes like furnace glass. Then, preserve it carefully, Ambassador. You will need paperwork while your colonies learn obedience. He signed the extension order on screen with a biometric slash. Red seals bloomed beside his name, and the council feed replicated the authorization across market and military channels in real time. Rear Admiral Hayes watched the same seals appear on the Resolute Dawn and exhaled through his nose as if confirming weather he had predicted. He opened a command circuit that linked Fleet Operations Strategic Assessment on Luna and Corridor Relief Command. Record this as open hostile intent against civilian medicine, he said. Initiate contingency lattice. Phase 1 now. Civilian escorts reclassify to protected humanitarian movement. Destroyer screens to Vera Junction and Arlen Gate. Legal packets go live on Brooks's mark. Sarah Brooks answered from Luna without hesitation. 17 det nullification suits uploaded and queued. We push when League brokers touch the first medical pallet. Also, we intercepted Krellick's compliance scripts. They assume colony panic by hour 20. Recommend we make that assumption expensive. Approved, Hayes said. Do it cleanly. Back in the chamber, Truan attempted to reclaim the initiative by requesting formal acknowledgement that humanity had declined arbitration. Elena gave him a thin, exact nod. Humanity declines arbitration under duress while aid traffic is under armed seizure. We accept full responsibility for defensive action. We invite all Federation observers to monitor our conduct in real time. She turned to the neutral tiers. You will have our telemetry, our targeting logs, and our medical priorities. Judge us by what we do, not what is said about us. That offer produced the first real fracture in Krellick's confidence. Transparency was not a language they used unless compelled. Segment Master Truan's upper hands paused over his ledger display for half a second too long, then resumed. The session dissolved into procedural noise, but the decisive lines were already drawn. In the consultation corridor outside the chamber, Elena met Mitchell, Novak, and Larson as security teams shifted from ceremonial spacing to hardened posture. Mitchell spoke first. Privateer groups are vectoring toward Vera already. They're calling it a compliance demonstration. Larson checked her slate. Colony channels are holding. No panic runs. Mutual ration networks activated across 6 sectors. Monastery ships from Aum are offering cold storage for medicine. They asked whether they should paint humanitarian markings larger. Tell them yes, Elena said. Tell them to transmit continuously and keep their lights on. Novak looked up from her legal feed. The medical embargo order gives us threshold authority in 12 jurisdictions, possibly 14 if LUM concurs. We can freeze League collateral if we prove intentional deprivation. Brooks will prove it, Mitchell said. Elena nodded once. Then this moves in layers exactly as planned. No vengeance, no theatrics, no mission creep. Corridors open. Civilians shielded. Evidence preserved. A junior aide approached, pale but steady. Ambassador, Fleet Command requests final civilian policy confirmation before engagement protocol broadcasts. Elena keyed her authorization into the aide's slate. Transmit this verbatim. Human forces are authorized to disable hostile military and finance control assets threatening civilian transit. Civilian habitats, food grids, and non-combat infrastructure are protected unless directly weaponized. Rescue operations are species blind. She paused, then added, and send a copy to every neutral observer who asked whether we were bluffing. By the time she reached the secure lift, the first alert tone struck her wrist display. Krellex, Privateer Wing Sigma, has intercepted convoy group. Mercy thread at Vera approach. Noise-filtered audio followed. Unidentified Krellex captain, demanding kneeling broadcasts from human convoy masters as proof of charter acceptance. Under that demand, almost too quiet to hear, came the steady readouts of human freighter crews checking seals, pressure, and shield harmonics. Elena entered the lift with Mitchell and did not look away from the alert stream. They chose, she said. Mitchell met her eyes. Then we respond. At Vera Hyperlane Junction, Krellex Commodore. Var Skeln considered the deployment beneath him and saw mathematics, not risk. 3 human relief convoys, 42 civilian hulls total, 12 identified escorts, multiple medical containers flagged as priority. His own force carried 26 combat hulls with superior acceleration profiles, 2 interdiction barges, and privateer skirmish craft licensed to seize non-compliant cargo. He had run the attrition tables twice. Even if humans resisted, the corridor would close within 90 minutes. The kneeling broadcast would follow, and market fear would compound before the next cycle opened. Transmit demand sequence, he ordered. Visual capture mandatory. Emphasize legal language. A communications officer complied, projecting the standard humiliation script across all channels. Yield command authority. Cut drives, open hatches for compliance auditors. One human convoy captain replied in an unremarkable baritone. Negative. These vessels carry food protein, dialysis substrate, and pediatric insulin analogs. We are proceeding under humanitarian rite of passage. Do not approach inside 2,000 clicks. Skeln clicked approval at the phrasing. Predictable, he thought. Moral appeal first. Panic second. Collapse third. Advance interdiction barges, he said. Mark medical containers for confiscation. Seize 1 escort intact for instructional broadcast. What his tactical screen showed next did not fit the model. The lead human freighters changed formation, but not into retreat. Outer hull panels unfolded from cargo spines like dull gray petals, locking into layered armor shells that absorbed the first privateer volleys in showers of white sparks. Tug drones detached from beneath container rows and moved with unnerving precision, not to flee, but to stitch the convoy into overlapping shield geometry. The convoy became a moving wall. Skeln leaned forward. Civilian modifications? Unregistered, his operations officer answered, voice flattening with surprise. Modular plating, distributed capacitor loops, decoy thermal emitters. They are using cargo frames as baffled heat sinks. Cripple their tugs. Privateer wings dove. Human escort destroyers, which Skeln had cataloged as undergunned patrol variants, rotated broadside and fired staggered kinetic screens that forced the attackers to break formation or burn through debris at lethal vectors. No dramatic salvos, no spectacle, just disciplined denial of approach lanes. One Krellex skirmisher clipped a deflected fragment and tumbled, venting atmosphere in a slow spiral. A human command channel opened, this one from destroyer HRS Karina under Commander Imani Sato. Her tone carried the same almost polite finality Elena had used in council. Krellex units at Vera, you are interfering with protected civilian relief. Withdraw beyond demarcation and transmit surrender intent for damaged crews. Continue this action and you will be disarmed. Skeln bared his inner mandibles in irritation. They still issue warnings while being boarded. he muttered. "Deploy carrier drones. Saturate their escorts." Carrier drones launched in clouds, angular and fast. For 6 minutes, the junction became a lattice of tracer fire, decoys, and abrupt course corrections as human ships absorbed punishment that should have broken morale. Instead, damaged freighters rotated inward, while less damaged hulls took outer position, and civilian engineering crews patched ruptures under fire with foam lattice and field welders. Skellen watched one freighter lose a sensor mast, drop from formation for 11 seconds, then return with a tug drone clamped to its flank like a prosthetic limb. His tactical confidence began to fray at the edges. "Where are their reserves?" he asked, too quietly. Long Range answered him. "Multiple jump signatures at corridor edge. Unknown tonnage. They are arriving cold and dark from decommissioned mining vectors." Hayes had chosen his moment with patient cruelty. Human reserve destroyers and monitor corvettes emerged from shadowed orbits around the junction's old extraction rings, hulls scarred, markings mismatched, profiles dismissed for years as scrapyard inventory. They did not charge. They took positions that closed every profitable seizure lane and opened a protected transit corridor straight through the center of the battle space. On the resolute dawn, Hayes watched Vera's geometry settle into the pattern his planners had rehearsed. "Do not pursue fleeing units beyond Line Delta," he said. "Convoys first. Rescue second. Capture when practical." A bridge lieutenant glanced up. "Sir, we can trap Commodore Skellen's flagship if we push." Hayes shook his head. "We are not here for trophies. We are here to break the method." At Vera, method began to fail in public. Krellick's privateers expected isolated prey. They found layered mutual support. They expected panic buying and fractured command. They found civilian freighter masters relaying shield frequencies to warships as if they had trained together for years. They expected damaged humans to disappear into insolvency. They watched wrecked hulls rotate behind armored partners, patch, and rejoin the line before Krellick's gunnery could exploit gaps. By the third hour, Skellen's casualty board remained acceptable by leak standards, but his profit board was catastrophic. Seizures minimal. Ammunition burn high. Insurance exposure accelerating as neutral observers streamed verified footage of Krellick's fire against marked medical containers. Worse, a legal alert flashed across his command display. Provisional injunction entered in Lum Tribunal nullifying charter claims on humanitarian cargo pending deprivation review. Another alert followed from Pax Exchange, freezing collateral linked to Sigma Wing operations. He understood then that the battle was not one battle, it was a timed collapse of assumptions. "Commodore," his legal officer said, unable to mask strain, "if we continue firing on protected manifests, our own risk protocols can suspend autonomous defense coverage." Skellen struck the armrest hard enough to crack its resin edge. "Those protocols are internal. They are tied to authenticated broker channels, sir, and we are receiving margin alerts from League Corps." Human cyber teams had not yet touched his weapons. They had touched his confidence. At hour 6, Krellick's formations began to unravel in ways no tactical doctrine admitted. Some captains pressed attacks out of pride, others broke to preserve hull value. The result was a staggered retreat that exposed interdiction barges, which human escorts disabled with precise drive shots rather than kill strikes. Human medevac cutters entered the periphery under white beacons before the guns were fully silent, requesting surrender confirmation and boarding wounded from either side by proximity priority. Skellen watched one medevac pull 3 Krellick's crew from a drifting privateer that had spent the last hour trying to burn it down. He had no category for that in League accounting. 9 hours after first contact, the final Mercy Thread convoy cleared the junction intact. containers tagged for dialysis, antibiotics, and insulin. Transfer transmitted green status pulses as they crossed into open lane. Human escorts held formation until the last civilian drive signature fell below threat threshold, then turned broadside to screen recovery teams. Commander Sato transmitted one last message to all remaining Krelix units. Vera transit is open. Further interdiction attempts will be met the same way. You were warned in council. You are being warned again. On the resolute dawn, Hayes read the post-action slate in silence, then authorized distribution to Federation public channels with full telemetry attached. No triumphant anthem, no speech, just data and names and proof. When Elena received the report in transit between council security rings, she stopped long enough to read the casualty lines twice, in the convoy clearance line once. Then, she sent a tight beam message to Hayes that contained a single sentence. They have discovered the first flaw in their model. Hayes replied in under a minute. Hunger works only when people stop sharing. Hayes read the line a second time, then pushed Elena's message into the fleet-wide command net without commentary, as if it were simply another coordinate solution. On 32 human bridges, in convoy control rooms, in monastery cargo chapels with cracked displays bolted to old bulkheads, crews saw the sentence and understood the intent beneath it. They were not celebrating a junction held for 9 hours. They were standardizing behavior for the next 9 months if required. Sharing was no longer a virtue statement. It was doctrine. On Luna, Sarah Brooks watched that same message appear beside casualty updates and legal acknowledgments, then slid 3 windows into priority order. Window 1 tracked food flow by colony and week. Window 2 tracked medical stock depletion against revised shipping times. Window 3 followed Krelix market derivatives tied to scarcity shocks. The first 2 had begun stabilizing as mutual aid routes lit up. The third was behaving strangely, with expected gains flattening instead of compounding. She keyed open a channel to Anna Novak in the embassy legal suite. They built their pressure model on isolated demand pools, Brooks said. We are not giving them isolated pools. Send LUM Tribunal Supplemental Exhibit 12 now. Include VIRA, telemetry, and convoy manifests with observer signatures. Then, file injunction mirrors in Pax and Thel before they can form shop. Novak's reply arrived clipped and steady. Already drafting. We also have a statement from 2 neutral captains that Sigma Wing fired first on marked pediatric insulin containers. Brooks allowed herself one dry breath of satisfaction. Then, we are done arguing intent. Push it. In the belt habitats, no one waited for speeches. The Cinderhold Cooperative had 6 fabrication bays rated for mining joints and pressure doors, not naval work. Yet within 90 minutes they were cutting standardized armor brackets for civilian freighters and routing designs through open channels. A monastery ship out of Oum, old enough to have analog gauges beside smart glass, accepted 37 pallets of refrigerated antibiotics from Mars and turned for a narrow ice route the League's models had tagged as commercially irrelevant. On Callisto South docks, dock workers voted to suspend premium bidding on emergency cargo and replace it with lot scheduling by clinical urgency, then transmitted the algorithm publicly so any colony could clone it. None of this looked like a military operation from orbit. It looked like unglamorous people refusing to let strangers decide who received insulin on Thursday. By the end of the first Vero watch, Ingrid Larsson's board stopped flashing red in the medical corridors and shifted to amber in half the sectors under embargo threat. She stood behind Elena in the embassy operations room and read numbers that would have sounded mundane anywhere else. Dialysis shortfall projected at 40% had dropped to 19%. Broad-spectrum antibiotic exposure in outer clinics had moved from catastrophic to severe. Severe was still unacceptable, yet it meant patients were being treated instead of logged for palliative prioritization. Larson tapped one cluster of roots glowing thin green lines across the map. Ice haulers from Nereid Ring are carrying stabilized substrate in ballast tanks, she said. They filed as water transfer. Krelix auditors ignored them for 6 cycles because the margins were low. Mitchell looked over, expression flat, with a familiar kind of anger. They did not ignore them. They discarded them. Larson nodded. Either way, the cargo is moving. Elena studied the routes and kept her voice measured. Message every colony governor in sectors 4 through 9. Publish inventory truthfully. No inflated optimism. Tell them the network is functioning because everyone is reporting honest numbers and sharing load. Panic starts where data stops. A ping from Vera Observer Corps cut through the room. Neutral verification package complete. It included gun cam footage of Krelix fire intersecting medical containers, timestamped and signed by the scholars of Lum, avians of Kith, and an unexpected 4th party. 2 merchants of Pax whose houses had profited from League enforcement auctions for years. Their signature did not absolve them. It did make denial harder. Novak's legal cascade went live 6 minutes later. In one coordinated wave, Human and Allied Council filed debt nullification suits in 17 jurisdictions, arguing that contracts executed under deprivation threat were void ab initio and unenforceable across Federation exchange law. At the same moment, injunction requests targeted specific League collateral pools connected to privateer operations at Vera. This was not a broad moral plea. It was a surgical strike against cash flow. On Krelix Prime Exchange, the first freeze order appeared as a thin red bar across broker tier 6, then replicated upward faster than compliance teams could mute notifications. Risk engines adjusted, discovered cross-linked exposure to humanitarian seizures, and began throttling credit extension to the very privateer wings tasked with making the embargo frightening. A doctrine built on accumulating pressure met a counterforce built on distributing burden, and the arithmetic started to bend the wrong way. Brooks watched that bend in real time and sent Hayes a 4-line assessment. Embargo decay confirmed. Mutual ration networks reducing leverage half-life. Legal strike is biting operating liquidity. Recommend immediate expansion of low-signature medical routing. Hayes answered without flourish. Approved. Keep the routes ugly and redundant. Ugly became a compliment by evening. Containers moved on retrofitted ore lighters, chapel barges, agricultural tugs, and one retired survey ship whose captain transmitted a rote update every 2 hours in the tone of someone discussing weather and gasket wear. Human logistics officers stopped asking whether a vessel looked proper and started asking whether it could carry sterile packs at stable temperature through radiation pockets. Asteroid machinists printed replacement valves in lots of 500. University labs switched from dissertation sequencing to generic antiviral synthesis and mailed protocols to anyone with a clean bench and decent filtration. Retired nurses on series recorded triage refreshers in 6 dialects and sent them free. The Krelix had expected scarcity to narrow behavior into selfishness. Humanity turned scarcity into a cooperative engineering discipline. In a secure tower above the Prime Exchange Amphitheater, Segment Master Truon listened to the reports arrive in layers that refused to align with his priors. Tactical losses at Vera remained recoverable by League standards. Legal exposure was not. His aides projected corridor maps, and each time a red seizure lane appeared stable, 3 small green alternatives lit outside the lane using ship classes his analysts had rated inconsequential. Monastery hulls, ice haulers, belt cooperatives. Truon expanded a freight profile and stared at the absurdity. One of the largest antibiotic deliveries in cycle had moved on a vessel registered as devotional transport with a tax exemption for educational outreach. His second clerk made a careful clicking sound. Segment master. This resembles stochastic smuggling behavior. It resembles civic improvisation, Troon said, each word dry as ash. And we did not price for it. He opened a private channel to High Commander Jack. The commander's image, resolved over tactical overlays, armor still scorched from deck transit, irritation held in rigid posture. Troon gave him the short version first because Jack had never tolerated nuance. When angry, Vera failed to produce deterrence. To produce observer-certified evidence supports human deprivation claims. 17 jurisdictions accepted emergency filings. Collateral freezes are expanding. Jack's eyes narrowed. Reallocate reserves. Buy pressure where it is cheap. Starve the frontier harder. Troon let the silence sit for a fraction too long. The frontier is no longer a discrete market. They are cross-subsidizing through volunteer networks and low-margin carriers. Pressure is diffusing. Jack leaned closer to the camera. You are telling me a species with shorter lifespans and sentimental governance solved siege economics by community kitchens and monastery convoys. I am telling you, Troon said, that their sentiment has become infrastructure. In the command pit below them, younger Krellix officers exchanged glances they would never have risked during a profitable campaign. The League's prestige came from certainty, from the promise that each sanction and seizure narrowed options until surrender looked rational. Human behavior had added options instead. Not endless options, not safe options, but enough to deny collapse schedules. In Krellix doctrine, that distinction was heresy. Jack terminated the channel and convened the inner strategy cell within minutes. Commodore Vars Skelln appeared by secure feed from a repair cradle. His right crest plate cracked. Voice controlled. He reported Vera without embellishment. Human civilian hulls converted into layered bastions, escort coordination beyond forecast, rescue operations species blind, privateer morale degraded by public telemetry release. One admiral from Revenue Security struck the table rail. Then stop giving them footage. Disable observer platforms. Another officer countered immediately. Neutral species are already carrying independent records. Attacking observers widens coalition risk. Jack listened, then issued what sounded like force, but carried strain. We escalate where they are weakest. Audit every peripheral supplier. Seize fabrication feedstock. Interdict coolant and capacitor ceramics. If they want distributed production, deny the inputs. Troon spoke from the side screen, precise and unwelcome. We tried selective feedstock choke against the Tarn breakaway 15 cycles ago. It succeeded because they had single-source suppliers. Humans do not. They are substituting downgrade components and accepting lower efficiency. Their systems degrade gracefully rather than fail cleanly. Jack's mandibles tightened. Graceful failure is still failure. Overlong horizons, Troon said. Our deck clocks are short. That was the line no one wanted heard in open command. League Warcraft and League Finance had always operated on synchronized urgency. Ships created fear quickly, markets harvested compliance quickly, and legal codices laundered outcomes into precedent quickly. The endurance test was designed to make resistance costly before adaptation could organize. Humanity had adapted inside the first cycle. Skelln requested permission to speak plainly. Jack gave it with obvious reluctance. At Vera, Skelln said, we expected convoy captains to defend their own hulls first. Instead, they defended network integrity. Damaged freighters rotated by collective priority, not ownership. Civilian crews accepted tactical instructions from warships without jurisdiction disputes. If that pattern holds, attrition based on isolated fear will continue underperforming. Underperforming. A clinical word for the first operational crack in a doctrine that had conquered 87 wars. Jack stood and paced the narrow span behind his command chair, claws striking alloy. Then break their unity. Information operations. Seed narratives that core worlds are hoarding. Expose local shortages. Manufacture proof if needed. Truen answered before anyone else could. Fabrications will not survive at current observer density. Human channels are publishing inventory by district in near real time. Their transparency reduces rumor yield. Jack stopped pacing and looked at him with open contempt. Your ledgers promised submission in 10 cycles. My ledgers assumed rational actors maximizing private survival, Truen said. They are maximizing collective continuity. That changes the curve. For the first time since the emergency session, Jack did not immediately shout someone down. He stared at the tactical sphere as if force of will might restore familiar equations. Around him, data threads thickened into a pattern he could not command by intimidation. Insurance spreads widening on league-aligned privateers. Neutral insurers refusing coverage for medical seizure operations. Small worlds, once silent, now offering port repairs to human relief ships because they had watched medevacs pull Krellick's wounded from burning hulls. Mercy had entered the market as a strategic signal, and the League had no instrument for pricing it. Jack resumed his chair with visible effort, voice lower now, colder. Then, we regroup. We tighten command permissions and remove broker autonomy from forward wings. We centralize audits under military authority. Prepare a demonstration strike, where they cannot improvise with cargo plating and volunteer welders. I want a target that restores fear and discredits this sharing narrative. Skellin hesitated, which he had not done in public before. Recommendation, High Commander. Do not target civilian food grids. It will harden neutral opposition. Jack's stare turned lethal in everything but action. I asked for restoration, Commodore, not caution. And I am giving you survival, Skellin said, almost quietly. The room held that sentence like a blade laid on glass. Jack did not punish him. Not yet. He turned to Truen instead. Find me a battle space where their legal tricks and volunteer networks have less reach. Somewhere we can impose sequence again. Truen's clerks began searching corridor maps for junctions with weak observer presence and high military relevance. After 13 seconds, one route pulsed amber on the central display. Arlen Gate, where traffic density was lower, sensor clutter higher, and infrastructure old enough to hide a great deal of preparation on either side. Truen set his hands on the rail, posture composed, voice returning to ritual form, even as confidence bled from the edges. We can still compel outcomes, he said to Jack and to himself, but not by repeating Vera. We redesigned the test. On Luna, as Krellick strategy cells shifted to Arlen models, Brooks caught the first encrypted hints of that pivot and forwarded them to Hayes with a single annotation that mirrored Elena's earlier restraint. They are trying to relearn us in real time. Hayes read Brooks's annotation, let his eyes rest on the word relearn, and keyed a command path that had sat dormant in doctrine files for 14 years. Initiate braid rotations, he said. Combat, repair, rescue. No unit stays in one function long enough to break. Civilian specialists are now attached by capability, not uniform. Operations looked up from their consoles almost in unison. Braid rotations were expensive in training hours, bureaucratically awkward, and brutal on tidy chains of command. They were also built for exactly this kind of war, where endurance mattered more than spectacular wins. A destroyer crew could run gunnery for 6 hours, damage control for 6, medevac escort for 6, then hand off to a second crew that had been sleeping in acceleration bunks with tools clipped to their belts. Civilian welders from Cinderhold could patch a warship hull, then shift to reinforcing a clinic transport, then rebuild drone racks on a freighter that had never been rated for combat. It looked disorderly from outside. Inside the system, every hour fed the next. Brooks saw his order propagate and began matching human fatigue forecasts against Krellick's pursuit patterns. "They keep assuming linear exhaustion," she told her analyst Pitt. "Push them a model where we degrade in one channel and recover in another. Then, make it real." At Arlen Gate, Krellick's forward scouts arrived expecting to find a limping relief architecture still recovering from Vera. Instead, they found transponder lists that made their threat software stall. Hulls marked damaged 40 hours earlier were back in lane with new armor signatures and altered heat behavior. Freighters previously tagged as passive now carried point defense grids slaved to escort destroyers. One ugly mining tug had welded 3 spare radiator fins onto its spine and was towing 2 hospital containers through a crossfire corridor while transmitting jokes in open band standard about premium express service. Commodore Var Skeln watched the feed from his command cradle and felt the first honest edge of uncertainty he had allowed himself since his promotion. He recognized registry numbers he had personally marked for follow-up seizure. The ships should have been in repair docks, in insurance disputes, in arbitration queues. They were here, accelerating, armed in improvised ways that violated every clean assumption in League logistics doctrine. "Confirm identity integrity," he told Tactical. "Confirmed," his officer replied. "Same hulls. Modifications exceed standard yard capability." "How long since last contact on the Carina group?" 71 hours. Skellen stared at the number. "No." A beat of silence. Then, quietly, "Yes, Commodore." The first engagement at Arlen was short, sharp, and strategically humiliating for the League. Krellick's interceptor wings attempted a familiar pressure sequence, slicing at convoy edges to force escorts into defensive spread. Human commanders did spread, but only briefly. Then, civilian tugs and monastery ships executed pre-briefed vector shifts that narrowed attack geometry while destroyers cycled in fresh crews and sustained fire discipline without the hesitation Skellen had counted on from tired operators. He damaged 2 human hulls severely, crippled 1 tug, and lost 4 interceptors, plus an interdiction boat to precise drive shots that left crews alive and hardware dead. By the second watch, Skellen expected human pace to drop. It climbed instead. He watched the same human crews reappear at different stations with changed call signs and clean biometric spikes, indicating rest intervals his side had failed to track. Every time his gunners found what looked like a weak seam, a support element arrived that did not fit military profile tables. A civilian exotherm engineer corrected shield harmonics on an escort and doubled its absorption window. Volunteer surgical teams stabilized wounded pilots fast enough to return them to simulator support within the hour. Retired freight navigators ran threat plotting from monastery holds and fed cleaner route options than active duty systems generated under jamming. The balance shifted in increments too small for grand speeches and too relentless to deny. On the resolute dawn, Commander Imani Sato stood over a tactical display that looked like weather over bad terrain, all fronts and pressure bands and small survivable corridors. Her destroyer still carried scars from Vera. Its hull plating no longer matched color or texture, and one sensor mast had been replaced by a repurposed ore scanner with hand-painted calibration marks. It worked better than the original at short range. "Carina to Corridor Command," she said. "We have 6 civilian vessels with capacitor burn and 1 medbay overflow. Request braid handoff in 20 minutes. The answer came from a ship no Krellick's planner would have prioritized for targeting. The monastery carrier Lantern of Erie, crewed by Seekers of Aum and 3 human reserve teams. Handoff accepted. Repair teams ready. Tea is available for all boarding personnel regardless of species." Sato's executive officer blinked once, then smiled without showing teeth. That is either spiritual hospitality or the most aggressive logistics flex in this sector. Sato did not look up from the plotting grid. Either way, we are taking it. 3 days after Vera, the Krelix risk board registered a pattern its designers had labeled unlikely edge behavior and never expected to see at scale. Human sortie tempo remained high despite continuous harassment. Vessel availability recovered faster than replacement cost projections. Insurance penalties on prolonged interdiction rose as neutral observers certified repeated leak fire against protected traffic. Worse, morale analytics from captured open channels showed human crews reporting strain honestly, rotating through support and returning with steadier performance instead of collapse. They were not pretending not to be tired. They were building systems that let tired people keep function. In the Prime Exchange Strategy Tower, Troon listened as junior analysts tried to describe this without admitting panic. They used phrases like non-standard resilience architecture and distributed competence reservoir. Troon translated it in his own mind into simpler language. The humans had turned endurance from an individual trait into a shared utility. Jack did not accept the translation. Then break the utility, he snapped. Strike repair nodes. Hit medical relays. Force them to choose between combat readiness and compassion. Skellin spoke from secure feed, voice clipped with the fatigue of someone still doing his own math while orders changed above him. We have hit repair nodes. They redistribute. We hit relays. They reroute through civilian sanctuaries with observer escorts. We force choices. They answer with both. Jack's crest lights flared. There is no both in attrition. There is if they planned for substitution instead of optimization, Troon said. We optimize pressure. They optimize continuity. Jack turned his contempt on both of them and issued a new directive, centralizing command permissions across Arlen operations. It arrived too late to restore initiative. Centralization slowed responses by minutes. Human braid rotations exploited those minutes like engineers exploiting stress fractures. A crippled League corvette waited 6 minutes for authorization to withdraw under cover. In those 6 minutes, human monitors bracketed its drives and took it dead in space without breaching the crew deck. Another League wing held fire while legal verification updated target status. Human escorts used the pause to shove a pediatric vaccine shipment through the corridor and out of range. By then, alien worry had stopped being private. The avians of Kith filed a formal neutral memorandum, noting that human convoy protection now exceeded Federation baseline standards under active interdiction conditions. The scholars of Lum appended a legal commentary with unusual directness. Endurance-based coercion against humans was demonstrating decreasing returns and increasing liability. Even the merchants of Pax, speaking through 3 careful layers of deniability, began selling short-term service contracts to human cooperatives while quietly reducing exposure to League enforcement funds. Human resolve did not manifest as one declaration. It looked like thousands of decisions made by people with limited sleep and clear priorities. Elena saw that at the Vera Coordination Annex when she stepped off a secure shuttle and walked into what had once been a tax arbitration hall. It was now a humming logistics floor where military officers, civilian dispatchers, monastery quartermasters, and allied volunteer medics worked shoulder to shoulder beneath old chandeliers that no one had time to dim. A wall-sized map tracked convoy status in plain language. Insulin, dialysis substrate, antibiotics, fracture kits, nutritional proteins, water filters. Every line item had a destination and a person responsible. Larson handed Elena a slate as they walked. Shortages remain acute in sectors 7 and 9. We are holding triage windows. No silent clinics. Every facility reports twice per shift. A young dispatcher at the next station raised a hand for attention without standing up from her console. Ambassador, correction request on route Green Delta. We can shave 40 minutes if we trust the Nereid ice pilots through the debris belt. Elena looked at the pilot roster. Most were civilian. 2 were retired Navy. 1 was a Valerai volunteer who had lost family to a Krelix contract famine 15 years earlier and had shown up with her own fuel credits. Approve it, Elena said. Send observer tags with them. No hidden heroics. In the adjacent bay, Mitchell watched a briefing circle that would have looked absurd in peacetime procurement culture. Marine boarding leads, 2 freight union mechanics, a pediatric nurse, and a data attorney from Novak's team discussing how to preserve chain of custody on seizures while moving patients through compromised docks. The nurse was explaining oxygen staging with clipped authority. The Marines listened. Mitchell caught Elena's eye and gestured at the group. That is why this is not breaking, he said. They are not asking who owns the solution. By the first week of Arlen operations, human crews began leaving small notes on repair bulkheads where incoming shifts would see them. Valve 3 sticks when cold. Do not trust sensor 7 near radiation bloom. Patch on port seam holds if you keep speed under 0.8. Also, drink water. Also, tell Tamsin in medbay that her patient made transfer and asked about her garden. The notes were practical, unadorned, and strangely intimate in aggregate. They reduced errors. They also made the war personal in a way Krelix doctrine could not model, because the doctrine treated people as throughput, and humans kept insisting people were the point. Hayes addressed the fleet on open command at the end of a 14-hour cycle, his voice roughened by use, but steady. You have all seen the numbers. We are taking damage. We are tired. Some of you are angry enough to set fire to every Krelix hole in range. You will not do that. We are not here to mirror their method. For 2 centuries, we accepted delay and insult to avoid wider war. We warned them what coercion against civilians meant. They escalated anyway. So we will finish this with discipline. Keep corridors open. Keep records clean. Protect the living first, then settle accounts under law. They called this an endurance test. Let them learn what endurance looks like when a species refuses to abandon its own. No one cheered. They went back to work. On Krelix channels, fear stopped hiding behind jargon. Captains asked for reassignment from interdiction duty to static defense posts. Privateer crews demanded hazard multipliers that League finance had already frozen. One compliance auditor transmitted a resignation notice in the middle of a targeting update, citing moral contamination of contract practice. Another deleted his own notice and stayed, then sent encrypted inquiries to Federation Council about surrender terms for non-combat financial staff. Truan saw those inquiries and understood the strategic fracture had widened beyond hull counts. The turning point arrived not as a single battle, but as a control transfer of the calendar itself. Brooks's team detected synchronized anomalies in League command traffic around Arlen and 3 adjacent corridors, compressed authentication windows, central override packets, and emergency credit lines routed through prime exchange war accounts. They are cannibalizing future liquidity to hold present operations, she told Hayes on Secure. If we sustain corridor pressure another 40 hours, they cannot finance dispersed interdiction at scale. Hayes looked at the projection, then at Sato's readiness board. Can we hold 40? Sato answered first. Yes, if braid rotations stay intact. Larson added from the civilian network. Yes, if convoy prioritization remains transparent. Novak's channel chimed in. Yes, if we keep feeding Court's verified telemetry. Elena listened to all 3 and gave the order that formalized what had already become reality. Execute corridor consolidation. We do not chase prestige targets. We lock relief lanes, deny seizure economics, and force them to mass where we can see them. Human task groups shifted like a closing hand. Arlen stabilized under layered escort arcs. Secondary lanes that had bled tonnage for weeks hardened behind rotating pickets and decoy traffic. Legal freezes spread from wing accounts to central clearing pools. League captains who tried independent raids found their coverage voided mid-sortie as authenticated margin calls hit command nets. Some fired anyway. Most broke contact. 8 hours later, Skellin sent Jack a recommendation he knew would be treated as disloyalty in another cycle. Forward interdiction is no longer sustainable. Consolidate at prime exchange defensive grid. Preserve core assets. Negotiate from survivable position. Jack's response was immediate and public to his command tier. We do not negotiate with labor species. Truan read the exchange and for the first time did not defend his commander in the strategy log. Near midnight station time, an emergency Krellix broadcast splashed across Federation channels with all the theatrical cruelty of a regime trying to restore fear by spectacle. High Commander Jack stood before the Ledger Spire tactical emblem and announced a concentration of exchange fleet carriers around Prime Exchange. He declared that captured aid workers taken in recent boarding actions would face public execution for charter sabotage unless humanity withdrew from contested corridors and accepted supervised labor status. In the coordination annex, the room went still without becoming quiet. Consoles kept chiming. Route updates kept moving. Someone dropped a tool in the repair bay and swore under their breath. Elena looked at the faces around her, at Rage held in check by routine, and then at Hayes on the secure hollow. He did not ask whether this was the final confrontation. He asked, "How fast can we move without losing the lanes we promised to protect?" Brooks answered with a packet already built. Sato began reallocating escorts before the sentence finished. Novak opened tribunal emergency channels for hostage documentation and war crimes injunctions. Larson updated medical routing so no clinic would go dark while fleets shifted. Elena keyed her transmission to all commands and all neutral observers in the same motion. Prime Exchange has declared mass hostage murder as policy. Record is established. Human forces are moving now to end Krellix military coercion capability and recover the captured. Corridors remain protected. We do not abandon civilians to win battles. On the central map, vectors arced toward Prime Exchange like converging weather fronts, disciplined and deliberate. And every officer on both sides understood that the test had entered its last phase. Rear Admiral Marcus Hayes watched the convergence vectors tighten around Prime Exchange and felt the old instinct to strike straight through the center, break the carrier wall, and drag the hostages out by speed and shock. A primary consideration was that Jack expected precisely that reaction. The Krellix had built their doctrine on forcing opponents into emotionally expensive choices and then billing them for the damage. Hayes studied the tactical sphere one final time, then gave orders that sounded almost mild. No frontal rush. Release anchor packages. Decoy lattice on my mark. Rescue lanes remain green. Whatever else happens. Prime Exchange hung in the black like an altar to predation. The Ledger Spire rose from the station core, ringed by carrier slabs arranged in nested shells, each shell screened by interceptor swarms and automated defense barges slaved to exchange risk engines. Jack had chosen spectacle with professional care. The execution platform holding the captured aid workers sat at the edge of the Spire's primary viewport, lit for every public feed in the Federation. The message was simple and ancient. Obedience or witness a murder. Commander Imani Sato keyed her destroyer group into assault posture and sent one line over the shared circuit. All units, remember the mission hierarchy. hostages, corridor control, command collapse. In that order. Her gunnery chief answered with dry calm. Understood. We will disappoint anyone hoping for heroic nonsense. On Luna, Sarah Brooks watched encrypted broker traffic pulse through League channels and opened the attack package she had built from stolen compliance scripts, court filings, and the Krellick's obsession with authenticated procedure. Cyber teams hold injection until overcommit threshold. We need their interceptors off-leash and their defense AI hungry for collateral control. Then we give it paperwork poison. Across the battle space, High Commander Jack stood in his amphitheater beneath rotating columns of market data and fleet telemetry. Segment Master Truan was at his right, silent and rigid, while Commodore Skelln's feed burned in a side window with Arlen damage still visible along his crest. Jack addressed all channels at once, voice amplified through the station's ceremonial acoustics. Human units massing at Prime Exchange are in unlawful proximity to Sovereign League property. Withdraw immediately and accept charter adjudication. Non-compliance will be answered with exemplary correction. Your species has survived this long because we permitted inefficiency to exist where it amused us. That indulgence ends now. Observe your aid personnel and understand the cost of delusion. Elena Kowalski heard the broadcast from the command deck of the relief carrier Astor Vale, where she had refused the safer rear node and insisted on being inside the same risk envelope as the people Jack threatened. She opened a return channel routed to fleet, station, and every neutral observer platform still in sensor range. Her voice carried no strain, only finality. For 2 centuries, we accepted your insults, your procedural games, and your selective law because we believed peace might still be chosen. For 2 centuries, we separated arrogance from atrocity and answered contempt with patience. We warned you in open council that coercion against civilians would be treated as warfare. We warned you that seized convoys would be freed. We warned you that medicine is not a bargaining chip and aid workers are not collateral. You answered each warning by escalating harm and calling it optimization. So hear this clearly. Humanity is now terminating the military and financial machinery you built to monetize suffering. Your crews may stand down and live. Your civilians will not be targeted. Your prisoners will be recovered. Your command leadership will face law, not vengeance. We hoped you would choose legitimacy. You chose poorly. Silence lasted half a breath. Then Hayes dropped his hand. Mark. The first wave was invisible until it was already working. Human corvettes fired gravitic anchor buoys in long arcs that looked like misses to Krellick's targeting systems. The buoys unfolded as they drifted, sank artificial wells into local vectors, and pinned carrier maneuver envelopes just enough to turn elegant formations into heavy, predictable structures. Jack's tactical officers shouted corrections that arrived seconds late. Those seconds became geometry, and geometry became casualties. 19 minutes into the engagement, the second wave hit. Decoy signatures bloomed across the grid. False capital ship profiles, spoofed reactor plumes, phantom medevac clusters designed to trigger Krellick's interception priorities. Jack took the bait with doctrinal confidence and committed 2 full interceptor wings to cut what he believed were human reinforcement lanes. They drove straight into pre-sighted kinetic corridors where hidden monitors had already seeded dense debris cones. Human destroyers did not chase. They simply timed impacts, fired staggered screens, and let physics do the humiliating part. Skelln watched Wing 3 disintegrate into broken vectors and transmitted to Jack with stripped-down urgency. Pull interceptors back. We are firing into authored kill space. Jack did not turn. Hold pressure. We are close to collapse. We are close to blindness, Skelln said. Hayes used that blindness. Sato, Lane Cobalt, bring the hostage platform out of line of fire shadow. Brooks, prepare package. Sato's group knifed through a seam between two anchored carriers, taking glancing fire and answering with precise drive shots that left hulls drifting, but intact. A monastery tug attached to her stern dropped shield buoys around the execution platform in a maneuver that would have gotten everyone court-martialed in peacetime and decorated in any sane war. Human Marines and armored cutters latched to the platform trusses, cut restraints, and moved the aid workers into hardened capsules while the battle still raged meters away. Hostages clear, Sato reported, breath even. No fatalities. We have 2 critical injuries stabilized. Copy, Hayes said. Now we remove the spine. Brooks gave the cyber command at the exact moment Krellick's command networks surged to compensate for the hostage loss. Inject margin cascade. Authenticate as Tier 1 broker emergency. The malicious packet wore perfect Krellick's credentials because it was made from Krellick's keys captured in earlier audits. It entered risk engines as a routine liquidity event, then began issuing fatal margin calls against the very defense platforms protecting Prime Exchange. Automated systems obeyed their own hierarchy. When insolvency flags crossed red line, preserve ledger integrity before tactical aggression. Defense barges powered down in sequence, weapon ports dimming 1 ring at a time around the spire. Jack stared at his displays as if glare might reverse code. Truan whispered what no one else dared. They are not hacking us. They are making us obey ourselves. Hidden asteroid monitors that had drifted inert for years woke on remote command. Their rail lances fired once each, silent at launch and catastrophic on contact. 3 slugs hit Jack's flagship, the Exchange Spear, along the drive spine where armor was thickest and redundancy least elegant. The ship did not explode. It shuddered, lost thrust symmetry, and rolled out of command alignment like a felled tower. Krellick's resistance broke in layers. Some captains fought until power loss forced surrender. Others transmitted ident seals and cut drives the moment they saw the spire's defense ring go dark. Privateer wings tried to flee and found every outbound profitable vector blocked by human pickets that disabled engines with unnerving restraint. Human medevacs entered immediately behind strike groups, pulling survivors from burning compartments by proximity, not species. By the time the shooting thinned to sporadic bursts, Prime Exchange was surrounded, disarmed, and very much alive. No bombardment hit civilian hab rings. No retaliatory strike touched food grids. Hayes held the line he had promised, and that discipline spread faster than fear across surrender channels. Boarding phase, he said. Command deck priority. Jack alive, if at all possible. The boarding teams approached the Exchange Spear through ventral maintenance trunks that Krellick's architects had marked too narrow for combat use. Human engineers had measured them anyway. Sergeant Leon Ortiz led first stack, mag boots clanging on scorched plating, smoke drifting through emergency lights that flashed amber and then failed to darkness between pulses. Resistance came in short, frantic bursts from officers who still believed rank could substitute for options. The Marines moved with contained violence, disarming, pinning, pushing forward. No theatrics, no pauses. Inside the tactical amphitheater, fires crawled along shattered display columns, while surrendered officers dropped ident seals into piles as ordered, the metallic clatter oddly delicate against distant hole groans. Jack stood at the central rail with Troon 2 steps behind him. His armor was blackened, one shoulder plate cracked, crest lights stuttering. He looked less like an emperor and more like a manager whose numbers had finally turned honest. Ortiz's team breached the final hatch and spread into firing arcs that covered every exit and elevation. "Hi, Commander Jack," Ortiz said, voice amplified and flat. Hands visible. Step away from the rail. Jack's hand moved toward the ceremonial sidearm at his hip, a polished weapon designed for podium symbolism rather than close-quarter survival. 3 human Marines adjusted stance by centimeters. Red dots settled across his chest and forearm. He froze. Then Elena stepped onto the scorched bridge behind them, escorted by Mitchell and 2 legal officers carrying live record slates. Her uniform was smoke-streaked, her expression unreadable. Jack stared at her with a kind of furious disbelief, as if the universe had violated a contract by allowing her to stand here. She stopped 10 paces away and spoke clearly enough for every recorder. You called this a test of endurance. You are now the surviving exhibit. High Commander Jack, you are under arrest by Federation War Tribunal Authority for Enslavement, Mass Deprivation, Targeted Medical Embargo, and Hostage Execution Order. You will be transported in restraints. You will receive medical care. You will receive counsel. You will answer for each count in open court. Jack swallowed once. The sidearm remained untouched. Around him, his officers kept dropping utensiles one after another until the sound became a steady rain of surrender. Truan closed his upper eyes and lowered all 4 hands to shoulder level. For a moment, Jack seemed poised between last defiance and sudden collapse. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse, smaller than anyone had heard in council. I surrender to human custody. Elena nodded to Ortiz. Shackle him. The cuffs locked with a clean magnetic snap. Mitchell signaled the legal officers, who tagged biometric confirmation and transmitted the surrender package Federation-wide on verified channels before anyone in the chamber could argue procedural contamination. Outside, surviving Krellix formation saw the feed in real time. Weapons went cold across the grid in less than 2 minutes. As Jack was escorted toward the hatch, he looked once through the cracked viewport at the battle he had staged for terror and found human rescue beacons moving among drifting wrecks, bright and methodical, lifting his people alongside their own. He gave no further order, no final speech, no curse fit for history. The test was over. The method had failed. Human endurance was still standing. The first order Elena gave after Jack's cuffs locked was not about pursuit. It was about oxygen. Prime Exchange civilian rings lost 30% grid stability when their defense barges powered down, she said over the command net, soot still on her collar. Engineering teams to Habrings 2 through 5. Fleet medevac priority remains beacon proximity. No species filters, no retaliatory strikes on population infrastructure. A harsh voice answered from a Marine assault channel, anger barely contained. Ambassador, those rings housed broker offices that signed the medical embargo. Request permission to level the ledger spire and end this permanently. Hayes cut in before Elena could. His tone was flat enough to carry steel. Denied. Military finance nodes only. Food distribution and life support stay online. We did not come here to become their argument. For 3 seconds, the channel stayed silent. Then the same Marine replied, quieter. Understood. Redirecting charges to command uplinks. Around Prime Exchange, human cutters moved through drifting wreckage under white rescue strobes. They opened Krellix hulls that had fired on them 2 hours earlier and pulled out stunned crews whose armor still carried League insignia. On medevac deck 3 of the Astor Vale, a human triage nurse with shaking hands pressed sealant over a Krellix pilot's thoracic breach, while a Valerie clinician adjusted pressure ratios for non-human lungs. Across from them, a human gunner from Carina waited his turn with a broken forearm and said nothing when the nurse passed him by for a worse case. He only asked, "Did the kid from Platform Cobalt make it?" The answer came from Larson's terminal a minute later. Yes. Transfer complete. By station midnight, the execution platform Jack had prepared for spectacle was gone, dismantled into tagged evidence crates. Novak supervised chain of custody herself, reading each item aloud for the scholars of LUM recording team. Restraint anchors, lot marked. Broadcast control spindle, seized intact. 2 execution authorization sigils, biometric match to High Commander Jack, catalog complete. Nearby, Marines stacked surrendered ident seals into transparent forensic bins. The metallic clatter that had filled the command deck became an inventory count, then an exhibit number. Mitchell arrived carrying a hardened case recovered from Jack's rail position. Inside lay the ceremonial sidearm, unfired, its polished grip reflecting the bay lights. He set it on Novak's table. Loaded. Safety off. 1 round chambered, he said. Novak did not look up from her slate. Log it as attempted resistance interrupted by lawful arrest. Accurate, Mitchell said and moved on. Truan requested to speak 2 hours later from a guarded medical berth, 1 manipulator arm splinted and all 4 hands visible above the blanket. Elena, Brooks, and a tribunal recorder took the call. Truan's compound eyes tracked each of them with exhausted precision. You disabled the defense ring but left us power enough for civilian pumps, he said. Why? Brooks answered first. Because children do not become legitimate targets when their governors commit crimes. Truan absorbed that, then tilted his head toward the recorder. Then record this. The alloy ledgers presented at council were not symbolic. They contained seizure schedules, deprivation projections, and contingency language for audit-deniable mortality. Vault node Spire 7, keyed to my genetic signature and Jack's command cipher. If the vault remains sealed, lower ring hospitals fail in 9 hours due to automatic creditor locks. Mitchell gave Elena a sharp look. It was the same look he had given in the chamber when Truan paused over his display, the fraction of a second that had first hinted at fear. This time, it paid off. Elena nodded once. Transfer his access under witness. If this saves those hospitals, it is entered on record. 3 human engineers and 2 Krelix technicians went into Spire 7 under armed escort and emerged with 22 alloy codices and a portable core stack. The codices were heavier than they looked, edges worn by handling, each etched with categories that had once reduced worlds to entries. LUM archivists scanned every page. PAX auditors verified checksum integrity. Brooks's team cross-linked the schedules to Vera and Arlen telemetry, proving intent down to time-stamped shipment IDs. The strange choice the League had made at the beginning, bringing physical ledgers into a digital age, became the thing that convicted them. 3 days passed before the last emergency beacon around Prime Exchange went dark, and it went dark because every crew had been recovered, not because anyone stopped looking. Human medevacs reported final tallies in plain language and attached body camera feeds to each log. The monastery carrier lantern of Erie served tea in paper cups to exhausted boarding Marines and surrendered Krelix clerks alike, and nobody found that absurd anymore. On Carina, Sato walked past bulkheads still covered in handwritten shift notes and ordered them photographed before repainting. These go to Fleet Archive, she said. Doctrine is written by people first, manuals second. 11 months later, the Federation Hall at Vera was full again, but this time the clerks carried statute drafts instead of extraction tables. Elena stood at the same speaking marker where she had issued 72 hours and read the first article of the Vera Accords into law. Coercive debt warfare against civilian populations is prohibited. Privateer contracting for medical or food interdiction is prohibited. Economic siege methods targeting non-combat survival systems are prohibited. Corridor Security Enforcement Authority is vested in a standing multinational command under human guarantor leadership with full observer transparency. The merchants of Pax signed first after humanity, a deliberate public correction to their earlier complicity. The avians of Kith added a memorandum making observer access permanent during any declared emergency. The scholars of Lum appended interpretive notes in unambiguous language, so no broker could weaponize ambiguity again. From the upper tier, Valari delegates watched with their hands unfolded and their gaze level, no longer lowered in witnessed shame. Across the corridor from the chamber, Tribunal Court 2 delivered sentence in the Jack case on open transmission. The presiding panel read each count separately. Enslavement by contract coercion, mass deprivation planning, targeted medical embargo, attempted hostage execution. Jack stood in restraint gray, crest lights dimmed to static. When asked for final statement, he looked toward the evidence display where his own signatures rotated beside convoy casualty charts and recovered ledger pages. "We optimized suffering because it worked," he said, voice stripped of ceremony. "It stopped working," the chief adjudicator answered without heat. "It was never lawful. It was tolerated. That tolerance is over." She imposed life confinement in a high-security rehabilitation facility with no command access, no market interface, and mandatory historical testimony to affected worlds. Jack was let out alive, guarded, and finished. Skellen accepted a negotiated sentence after providing operational archives and live testimony that corroborated command intent. Truan, having surrendered the Spire 7 ledgers and civilian lockout keys, received penal labor in reconstruction finance under external oversight rather than indefinite confinement. Elena did not call that forgiveness. She called it proportion. On Luna, Brooks briefed the new Corridor Transparency Directorate from a room that still had the old blackout protocol lights, now permanently switched off. Every seizure injunction filed during the war was either converted to standing precedent or formally closed in public docket. Every emergency report from Larson's network received outcome notation. Clinics resupplied, routes stabilized, or losses documented by name. Nothing remained in pending status because pending had been the League's favorite hiding place. Hayes declined Fleet Supreme and accepted the narrower title he wanted: Commander, Civilian Corridor Defense. "Big chairs attract theater," he told Sato on the Vera station balcony while tug traffic drifted below. "I prefer schedules that end with people fed." Sato took permanent command of Carina Group and turned braid rotations into academy curriculum. Mitchell moved to Federation inspection, where his first directive required any sanctions package to include humanitarian continuity modeling before approval. Novak chaired the new War Contracts Review Bench. Larson went back to colony coordination and kept the rule that had saved more lives than any speech: no silent clinics, ever. At dawn on the first anniversary, Elena stood beside a viewport on Vera Station with a mixed delegation and no security theater beyond routine checks. Outside, a convoy entered the hyperlane under ordinary running lights. No destroyer screen, no emergency formation, just freight, medicine, and passengers moving on schedule. One hull was an old Nereid ice hauler, still carrying ballast modifications from the war. Another was a monastery ship with faded paint and a new registry plate. Their transponders crossed the junction in open traffic, while children in the public gallery pressed their hands to the glass and argued about which ship looked fastest. Elena watched until the last signature cleared and the lane settled back into morning commerce. The endurance test had broken where humanity said it would, at the point where cruelty ran out of time and people refused to stop sharing.